Hi, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Risk Matrix.
The Risk Matrix, roll tide, baby.
Roll tide. And I'm here with James Junkin. He's my co-host here on the Risk Matrix, and I'm Dr. Martin. And today we've got a guest, but before we introduce our esteemed guest, James has got something to say.
This episode of the Risk Matrix by Veriforce is sponsored by Predictive Safety. Predictive Safety was founded in 2009 with the mission to improve workplace safety, reduce risk, and boost productivity by predicting and managing worker fatigue and cognitive impairment. Predictive Safety products include two patented software as a solution-based applications called Alert Meter and Prism, as well as biomathematical shift schedule assessments. Alert Meter is a 60-second graphics-based test developed under the guidance of NIOSH. Used on any device, it measures an individual's cognitive alertness and compares their score to their own personal baseline. Visit predictivesafety.com/Veriforce for more details on a special offer. Dr. Simon, you're in the Matrix, baby.
Hello, hello, hello.
So I'd like to formally welcome you, Dr. Simon. Today, James and I are blessed to have Dr. Simon Goncharenko with us. He is a data center construction EHS with Meta right now. He's had other lives and other jobs before that, but he's also a member of the Veriforce SAB board. Welcome, Dr. Simon, to the show.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Thank you for having me.
So just so our guests can kind of find out a little bit about you before we jump right into this, and spoiler alert, we're going to talk about human performance today, because that's kind of Simon's area of research. But Simon, can you tell us a little bit about your background, how you got from here to there, and what makes you passionate about safety?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So my last name, as you had mentioned it, is Goncharenko, and it's pretty long, 11 letters long, and it also has that KO ending, which kind of was a dead giveaway of a Ukrainian last name. So which let you know, I guess, that I was born actually in the former Soviet Union, and kind of started my life there. Came here for around college age to start getting some education, and received my bachelor's, master's, and then PhD. And initially, my initial education was in the area of theology, which you kind of look at it and you go, what does that have to do with safety? It's kind of totally different field, and it kind of seems that way. But over the last, I guess, 26 years of post-college life, post-college direction, I guess I am realizing more and more the connections between kind of my initial training and what I'm doing right now. And that connection really ultimately is, my life has always been about helping people, right? And finding ways to encourage people, finding ways to direct people. And really, the life of ministry, if you will, and the life of a safety, there are a lot more connections that people would realize, because in either one of those, you get to influence people. You have no authority, if you will, to authority that maybe a CEO has, or an upper manager has, to direct people and tell them you will do this, this, and the other. You need to, but you have to inspire and influence someone to do something that in the end is ultimately what they're after as well, right? Everyone wants to go home safely. And so how do you influence individuals to do that? So that's kind of the connection that I have seen, as far as just kind of, but my background, like I said, I came here when I was about, I came to the US when I was about 17 years of age, started college, then right after college, which was in Arkansas, went to Texas, got my master's, got married, and I guess the rest is history. I started working in the area of nonprofit, and did some work also in a couple of other industries. Ended up in oil and gas, being in Texas and not crossing oil and gas industry is kind of an impossibility, I guess. And from there, veered into this whole area of data centers, probably over the last 7 years. And that is where I stumbled on the whole topic of human operational performance, specifically within the context of data centers. But that's kind of in a nutshell, a high level overview of kind of who I am and where I've been. And I'm happy to dive into any of those areas if you guys want to. In specific,
Dr. Simon, you skipped a lot of your experiences in your short biographical assessment of yourself, and you've had a very unique career and life. And I'm inspired by a lot of the stories you've told to me over the years. And I'd like to back up to a certain point in time because I think it informed a lot of your thinking when it comes to safety and getting workers home safe from high hazard jobs. And you share that same vision that Veriforce shares. But as a child, you were there during the Chernobyl incident, were you not?
I was, and that's a very actually good question, because growing up, and that's a really interesting topic in and of itself. Growing up, geographically speaking, I grew up about 6 hours driving time from the area where Chernobyl explosion took place. And if you look back and kind of study the context and the details, and some people might remember the HBO special that went on not too long ago, focusing on that. It was the prevailing winds shortly after the disaster that was one of the major factors in how much radiation I was not exposed to, as I lived south west, I guess, of the area, and the winds during that area were going more northwest and more closer to the north. And that's the reason, folks as far as Scandinavian countries and even UK, their Geiger meters started registering things. And that's the reason Soviet Union, which was in the habit of not telling the truth as far as the media was concerned, was forced to reveal the information because the evidence was there. So yeah, that's definitely a very defining moment in my background.
And that's the first time that we hear the term safety culture.
Mm-hmm. That's very true.
It's in that report.
That's correct. The investigations that came out of that was what kind of birthed that whole culture. I mean, that whole element. And I know that's one of the favorite elements of yours as far as your life passion is concerned.
That's right. That's right. It is. It is.
I'm not going to let him go down that. I'm not going to let him go down that road today, though, because now he's starting to pout a little bit.
Between Roll Tide and safety culture, those two terms find a way in any interview that you conduct, don't they?
Yeah, but we're not going to let him go down that road today of safety culture. We might address it on a further panel on this show, but that's okay, because as you were talking about theology and how it relates to safety, that would be something that I would love to have a conversation on at some point, because my background's in geology and I can relate theology to geology. And so, I mean, we can get into that philosophical discussion, but I'm going to stop myself and not do that. But it's a topic for another day. What we really kind of wanted to talk to you about today, or at least start with it, is this concept of how everybody's really focused on serious injuries and fatalities, and how that curve is not bending the way that we wanted to, or as quickly as we wanted to, and how people are looking for solutions and or pressure points to kind of push that curve lower. And so what I would like to ask you is what kind of is on the horizon for HOP and human performance, and how does that relate to influencing the SIF trend?
Yeah, no, I think
that's a big loaded question.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And just like you said about some of the other conversations or some of the other topics, it's definitely something that we can be in for quite some time now. But I think I think you definitely kind of set me up pretty good as far as the initial direction of this question, and that is, I do believe that where we have been on the topic of safety, and that's when it comes to the more behavior-based trends. I'm glad to see that we are slowly edging away from that. I think the behavior-based concepts for two reasons, and there are a lot more reasons why I think it's time for us to move on. And one of those is because I think theoretically they're based on overly simplistic understanding of human behavior, right? You can definitely influence a single cell amoeba to do something that you wanted to do by rewards and punishment, but it's a lot more difficult to influence a 33 trillion cell human organism, right? There's just a lot more to it, in addition to free will and I just don't feel like it and everything else. So that's, I think, one of the reasons why I'm really glad for that movement away. But the second reason, I think, and the main reason, and that's kind of where I think your question really centers, is that the behavior-based approach really only centered on the kind of the point of the needle, right? Where the action took place. Usually by and large, your middle to upper management of any organization was really not involved in the process, because the idea was that it's the operational folks, it's the ones that are actually doing the action, are the ones that need to be involved. And so by the same token, I think our focus on human operational performance, human factors, human organizational topics, I think it's a good step in the right direction when it comes to bending SIF curve. I really do. But just the research that I've done and the information that I've processed and the trends that I'm seeing, I think that even most of the ways that we're looking at the human operational performance, I don't think we go far enough. I think it's a good start. I think a systematic way is a good start as well, but I'm just going to give you a couple of examples. I think even looking at the HOP trends and what we're doing, I think we're still leaving out a lot of our off-the-job behaviors, a lot of our off-the-job decisions. And I think if you think about it, I mean, it's one body, right? I have only one body to do what I do at work. And it's the same body that I turn around and do what I do at home or off work, right? And most of our organizations go, well, I have no control over what happens off work. That's not within the contract. That's not, anything that I can do anything about. But the idea is that when we leave that off the table, there's a huge part of the overall human being that we're not impacting, and therefore I think that's one aspect where just everything that we're doing right now, from at least the literature that I'm seeing in the human operational performance world, we're just not going far enough. I think there's more to be done. And I think when we start impacting that overall holistic entire human being, that's, I think, when we're going to start seeing a difference.
I can get on board with that. I can get on board with that. Now, let me ask you a question, right? Not to talk over Dr. Martin. When going back a little bit to some of the things that you said to align with the behavioral approaches to safety management systems, I think we've done a really good job over the last 30 years of driving down OSHA recordable injuries. And maybe that's through training, through more enforcement. Certainly that's the area of OSHA beginning in the early 1970s, behavior-based safety. But I've sort of adopted this theory. I'd like you to respond to it, that the same things that prevent OSHA recordable injuries are not necessarily the same things that prevent serious injuries and fatalities. And when we're looking at designing work, we have to think about the human being that's involved in the work. Human beings make mistakes. So I'd like you to respond to that, just in the concept of transitioning from a behavioral approach to more of a systematic approach. Do you agree with that?
No, I absolutely agree with that. I think a lot of the things we're doing, you're absolutely right. We're not considering that. I mean, the term human error, right? And the fact that to this day, no matter what organization we work for, when we have an unwanted event, be it an injury, property damage, fatality, whatever that may be, we always, get together and we have our investigations, and we're trying to determine, root causes. And a lot of times, if we're not careful, we seem to be settling down on this whole human error concept, which really, I mean, it's really kind of a lazy stop, I guess. It's not truly going down. And it's interesting. I see a lot of parallels. The more research I've done, I see a lot of parallels with the SIFs and what you're talking about with the highway fatality numbers, right? So in the United States, for example, our highway fatality numbers have kind of been at the same point for the last 60 years. And it's been a really interesting trend. And so if you look at those numbers in a more lazy way of not truly considering the entire context, you can say, boy, over the last 60 years, we've really not been able to move the needle on the highway incidents or highway deaths in the United States. And that's part of the story. But if you look at the number of cars that is on the road today versus 60 years ago, you get more of a story. But the interesting thing, and the reason I brought that parallel, is because, one of the things that highway safety and we are implementing in that area that we really need to start, I think, implementing in the safety, industrial safety, and in human operations is this whole idea. I mean, think about one of the preventative controls, right? Think about those rumble strips on the highways. What's our safety equivalent of a rumble strip? Because a rumble strip is there because it assumes, back to your question, James, it assumes that humans are gonna make errors. And so that's a control that's placed there to, get you back on into your lane, because the idea is that the errors are going to be there. And a lot of times I think we understand that theoretically, but we're still trying to prevent human errors as opposed to accepting the fact that humans are fallible. And fact of the matter is that each and every one of us makes mistakes. They even have a study that says, the difference between office-based personnel and field-based personnel and how many errors each of them makes in an hour. So there's a study available out there, and it tells you that that's just fact of life. We just, instead of trying to prevent those, what we ought to do is minimize those, but also introduce controls that will allow those errors to not end up in serious injuries and fatalities.
Where does free will come into play when designing a safety management system and in human performance?
Sure. No, I understand 100%. And I apologize again for asking you to repeat. I think it's another one of those topics that I think we can spend a little bit of time going down. But the idea is that, again, free will, I think, is theoretically, if you think about it, as a human being, I can get up in the morning, and this is kind of what I think where I was going down there is I can get up in the morning and I can know all the facts. I can cite the research. I can produce the evidence. And at the end of the day, I can still not feel like doing something, right? And so that's that idea. That's the concept that's very different in the world of amoebas, right? Amoebas function, they will operate in the way that you're prodding them to operate. And that's kind of the difference between an amoeba and a human being. And that's, I think, that whole concept of free will. So to me, how do you compensate for that? Well, I think that's where every organization that I've ever worked with or advised, I guess, that's where this whole idea of collecting evidence, and that's the whole idea of near misses. We focus so much on serious injuries and fatalities because we think that's our best data gathering event. But in my opinion, I think that those are great. But I think where you get a lot better data is your everyday, events like near misses, because near miss is the most incredible data point that your organization collect, because here's a perfect illustration of possibly human free will being expressed. And yet the controls that you have in your organization worked and prevented that event from from working out as a full-blown incident, fatality, or injury, or whatever. And so that's the kind of thing that you want to study. So every organization has different control points that could be introduced, but I think those are the ones that are saying, okay, we recognize free will, we recognize that everyone makes mistakes, and what are the guard lines that we can put into place? And I mean, and if your question was really dealing more directly with what are some of those guardrails, they differ from industry to industry, and certainly I think that collecting evidence based on the near misses is certainly one of those guardrails.
Well, I've said this a million times, and I'd like to take credit for it, but, Fred Manuel informed a lot of my thinking when it comes to safety management systems, because I began my career in the behavioral side of the house, and that's how I was trained. And I've sort of transitioned my way of thinking into, hazards are best controlled in the design and planning stage of the work, because that accounts for the potential for you to catch areas where human beings can make mistakes. So we can say, like your rumble strips, hey, people are going to be sleepy, people are going to be inattentive, people are not going to be talking on their cell phone or answering text or whatever when they're driving. So have a rumble strip on both sides of the highway to alert people to be able to get back into their lane and to hopefully operate their vehicle safely. So in my opinion, when we're talking about human performance, we're talking about the rumble strips of safety, right? And the best place to put the rumble strips in is when we're planning the work. If we design the potential for human error into the work itself, human beings will find it. Absolutely. Human beings will find it. Now, the second part of that, and I think it's what Dr. Martin was alluding to, when we get into free will, there is not a safety management system in the world that can account for I don't care. Right? Dr. Martin.
I just want to put in here before you finish that thought, James, that I feel the rumble strip for free will, or at least the guidelines, the things that make us not swerve off the road, is our organizational culture. And I think you can build that around people. They're still going to have some semblance of free will, but if you have a strong organizational culture, now I'm not talking safety culture, I'm talking organizational culture, that if people know what the norms and the ethics and everything that is involved in what you do, you may be able to weed out a lot of the free will, because they're going to make right choices, right? But there's also, as James said, there's also going to be somebody that just doesn't care, right? Well, but the rumble strip is your culture.
Yeah, no, I agree 100%. And I think what you're saying, I mean, we're coming right back around to the whole one of the foundations for human performance, if you will, and that is human variability, right? Because if you think about it, what we had done over the last 30, 40 years in behavior-based approaches, we tried to minimize human variability. We created our safety manuals, we created our SOPs, MOPs, whatever, if you will, and we try to force everybody, channel everybody into this minimal variability from our, from this direction, from this way of doing things. And I think what human organizational performance is doing is it's coming around and saying, actually, the human variability is where a lot of those strips happen, those rumble strips happen, right? Your humans are, and it all goes back to assumptions, really. I mean, if you think about it, because even free will, right? We started at the very beginning, even before you guys hit record, we were talking about culture and we're talking about safety culture, right? But really, as with anything else, you got to define terms, right? I mean, I always say this, that if you have an argument with someone, the argument a lot of times is won at the stage of defining terms. And a lot of times you may engage in a conversation and you may lose the conversation before you ever start, because you operate with two different definitions of terms. So why am I saying this? Well, back to free will. Does free will have a negative connotation behind it? In your mind, it may. It may mean, you may, by saying that, you may mean that it's a departure from the recognized ways, or the way that we want you to operate within this organization. But free will may also mean a desire by humans to succeed, even if they have to go off the reservation, right? And that goes back to the whole human variability. Is it a bad thing? Is it a good thing? And behind all that, I think, lies your worldview. Really, is do you think that your organization consists of individuals that are constantly trying to screw you over, if you will, and take advantage of you? Or do you think that your organization consists of individuals that basically want to do a pretty good job?
Right.
And they're going to leverage the experience that they have, and sometimes vary from the expected ways of doing things, because they think at the end that's going to get them to the desired outcome in the safest way possible.
And that's one of my objections, and changing my way of thinking over the years from a behavioral approach to safety, because that looks at workers as something that needs to be fixed. And if I could only fix the worker, if I could only get into the mind of the individual worker and motivate that worker and do these things for the worker, and we almost see the worker as the antagonist in this, and they're not. The worker is our greatest asset. That's how we get jobs completed. And sometimes I think when we're designing work and we're thinking about work, we act like the world is very linear, and work is linear, and every day is static. And human variability, look, that's where innovation comes. That's where we learn to do the job better, more efficient. The business of business is business, so to speak. So if I can do it more efficiently and at a less cost, then, there's where innovation comes. And we won't get that in a static work environment. That can also be innovative around occupational safety and health. But at the same time, there has to be some rumble strips when it comes to safety. Now, I'd like you to respond to this, because a lot of these things that we're talking about are being actively debated, and have been actively debated in the academic circles of occupational safety and health for years, or within organizations that have a tremendous amount of resources and assets to be able to design work. So where could, let's say, the safety professional go that has 100 people within their company that is challenged every day? They're doing training, they're doing incident investigations, they're doing drug testing, they're doing field assessments, they're writing policies and procedures. Their day is full, and they've heard of these terms, HOP and et cetera, but they really don't know. Where can they go to learn more about it, number one? And how can a safety professional begin to move from a behavioral approach to a human organizational approach and a systems approach to safety with limited resources?
It's a really good question. Our resource, and by the way, before I answer to that question, I wanted to point out something else that you had mentioned also, and that is, if you think about it, interestingly enough, with the business of business being doing business, right? That human variability in the course of that business, those same decisions, that same variability may be recognized, applauded, and even rewarded when the outcomes are good. And then we turn around, and that exact same decision-making, thinking, and actions can be a fireable offense when the outcome's different, right? So that's what we need to recognize, is those are the exact same behaviors that accomplish us that increase in productivity, increase in efficiency, increase in, whatever it is, decrease maybe in the time that it takes to operate something. And so, but back to, the question that you did ask, the good news about living in the age of internet is we have so much information that is so easily available at our fingertips. I mean, literally, it's all out there. It doesn't have to cost much. I think looking at Conklin and Decker and Reason, I think those are three of the great resources that you can get into that can give you kind of a good overview initially. There's lots of other names that are good out there, but I think those three would be a great start as far as the world of human operational performance. That's certainly where I kind of cut my teeth in this area of human factors. And, I think I look at kind of in any industry, pretty much one of the industries that we celebrate. And I look at the picture behind you, James, and that's a picture of a U.S. submarine. And United States nuclear Navy.
It's an LHD.
No, it's behind over on the other side. Is it not a submarine on the other side of your?
Oh, that's my ship I was on in the Navy.
Okay, all right. Well, it looks like a submarine, but either way, really, my point still stands, and that is U.S. nuclear Navy has been one of the industries that, whether you're in oil, gas, or data centers, you kind of point towards it and you go, they've done something right, because they've operated critical environments for the last 7-8 decades without any significant, back to the original question of significant injuries and fatalities, right? What is it that they've done? And that is one of the questions that actually got me going down this path, is I've started looking at them and I'm like, what has the U.S. nuclear Navy done, right? And you can start kind of looking down the road and like, well, okay, they have a very regimented schedule. They control what you eat, when you eat, how much you eat. They control when you sleep, how much you sleep. They have protocols for everything, right? And so it's some of those things are impossible for us to completely and totally reproduce in a civil environment, or in the civilian life. But the other thing that's been really interesting to me is I look at the Air Force, I look at the Army, I look at the Navy, and over the last 50 plus years, same with the Department of Energy, they have introduced both the human factors concepts, training, and understanding into their operations, to where they've integrated that. And it's interesting because, you can say that, oh, well, human operation performance is a new kid on the block. They've only been around 10, 20 years, but you look at the Navy, you look at the Air Force, you look at the Army, and they've been operating that way for, 30, 40 years. You look at the nuclear energy industry, the Department of Energy, and all of those concepts are there. So that's kind of an indirect way of saying, hey, lots of information available on the internet. If you just do enough research, there's a lot. And Conklin even goes through, same with Decker, they give you some very specific, down to earth initial steps of what you do to start the transition in thinking, right? And really, this goes back to the podcast that I recently started, and I thought about, what do I call it, right? Because I wanted to talk about culture, I wanted to talk about performance, I wanted to talk about safety, and at the end of the day, I kind of settled on calling it the leadership paradigm, because in my mind, it has to do with the leadership. I think that's where John Maxwell gets it absolutely right, because as the leadership goes, so goes the organization, right? And so that would be my advice, to those safety professionals that find themselves kind of in the thick of it. Do your research, understand what you're talking about, and then really the transition has to begin with the leadership. There has to be a buyout at that level, because at the end of the day, back to your favorite subject of safety culture, whether there is something like that out there or not, but we both would agree the culture begins with the leadership. They're the ones that will settle or will initiate that, right? And someone said that culture will eat your policies for breakfast, and I think it's very true. I've worked in organizations where the legal department will give you all the policies and guidelines and procedures, and the first day on the job, you understand that all that goes out the window, because there is a culture there that expects you to do X, Y, and Z.
Management gets the culture it deserves.
That's very true.
It's the culture that it deserves. We're almost out of time. Dr. Simon, thank you for joining us today. If you would, tell us where we can find your podcast, because it's very interesting. I think a lot of people can learn a lot about human organizational performance from your podcast.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So it's on Spotify, and it's called The Leadership Paradigm, Safety, Performance, and Culture. And you can look it up by that name, or look it up by my name. I just started it in the last month and a half or so. So just kind of starting that journey, but really want to focus on a lot of different aspects, because I think, like you guys were saying, there are a lot of these things that we're not even realizing can really, at the end, contribute to us being able to do it right.
Yeah. Yeah. Dr. Goncharenko, thank you so much for coming on our show. For anybody who's watching this or has watched it part or all the way through, hopefully all the way through, if you have any questions, pop them in the chat on the YouTube channel or on the LinkedIn posts that we make. Please, if you like what we're doing, click like. Even if you don't like what we're doing, click like and follow us and subscribe on YouTube because there's more where this came from. So thanks everybody for listening to the Risk Matrix with James Junkin and our guest, Dr. Simon Goncharenko. And we'll see you next time.